Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for joining this live event. I'm glad to have here my friend Horia, who is a lead test developer, and to discuss with him about this subject, who I know a lot of you Java developers are interested in, but it's not so often discussed. So thank you very much, Horia, for being here. Say hi to the audience. We are live. And guys, by the way, knowing that you are live, I want to remind you that you can always ask questions in the live chat and start discussions if you want. Yeah, Horia, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Laura, for having me, and yeah, thank you for approaching this subject. I know that all people are always jumping up to say, I want to be a developer, I want to write a lot of code, but often they don't realize that they have the opportunity to develop and to write a lot of code as an automation tester as well. So yeah, thank you for bringing up this subject and for giving it your attention.
Cool. Yes, it's a very interesting topic because a lot of people think about Java and programming with Java as being a developer creating capabilities in applications. They rarely think about having applications that test other applications. And I remember it was one of the reviews of my previous, my second book, Spring Start Here, where one of the reviewers said, it's somewhere in the first chapter where I say that Spring can be used, sometimes is used, or at least its dependency injection capabilities can be used for automation testing apps, because there's where you also have objects and you also have relationships between web objects, and you can use Spring to make it easier, of course. And there was something like testing apps for testing apps. I've never heard about that. So what are actually these kind of applications, and what is an automation tester? Can you tell us more, make us an overview about the subject?
Yeah, sure. So to be honest, automation testing has increased in popularity mostly in the past, let's say 5-10 years. Testing has always been there. Like even 20 years ago, when most of the applications were only desktop based and everything that we were doing was on desktop applications. So even at that moment, we had testing, but we had so little testing that automation was not even considered. However, in the present day, in an agile environment, working with a lot of features, adding a lot of new functionalities, everybody wants to make sure that everything that we already had in the application is still working while releasing something new. And here is where automation comes into place. Because even though, let's say, initially have an application that, let's say it only makes simple bank transactions, and that's the first thing that you're doing.
It's just a simple bank transaction.
Yeah, a simple bank transaction, yeah. So even if that's the first part of your application, that one you can test manually, you can make sure that everything is all right, and that's it. However, the longer you go on with the project, you start adding new functionalities. You want to send, let's say you have something recurrent, something that you pay every week. You have money sent to your friends. You have a lot of possibilities in your bank. Automatically, the number of test cases that you have available increases. And so instead of executing them manually to keep the quality at a high level, you start using these applications that are testing your product. And you're right, there are certain applications that can be used to test the desktop applications. There are frameworks developed for that in particular. There are lots of them right now on the market. Some of them are free, but I'm going to focus a little bit on the frameworks from each programming language that can be used for that. For Java, because we're starting to talk about that, we have a JUnit, which is basically built in the language, meaning that you have very few dependencies that you need to install in the project in order to be able to write tests. And those tests can be very simple or very complicated, because the JUnit is the engine that makes sure that your tests are running.
Isn't JUnit just used for building unit tests? Because I think most of the developers, they are probably, hopefully, aware, and they are doing their unit and integration tests. So you tell me that you can do more than unit tests with JUnit.
Yeah, exactly. So personally, I have been using JUnit as an engine to run Selenium tests. And when I'm saying Selenium tests, I'm talking about end-to-end test cases. So Laura, you've mentioned unit tests. These, if you think about testing, think about it as a pyramid. And unit tests are the base of that pyramid, meaning that for each function that a developer writes for his or her code, he needs to write a test that would validate that the function is working properly. And technically, this should be the highest number of tests in a project. So at the bottom of the pyramid. Above, you have integration or system testing. And here you can think about it like you have two functionalities: creating an account and signing in with that account. A test in integration would involve both these parts, creating the account and then signing in. After that, at the very top is where the automation dedicated testers are coming in with end-to-end test cases. And here, yeah, you can use Selenium, and you can use JUnit as an engine to run the tests, or you can write REST API test cases, or you can even combine them. So for example, if you have a setup to create, like you have some preconditions that needs to be executed, like a user account already created, some transactions maybe in a bank, or I don't know, some protocol for a network application, you can do that via REST API, and then maybe execute the validation part with Selenium. That's just one tiny example. But the point is, automation testers, the good ones, are the ones that are seeing this as a whole. They're not just opening up a web page and validating, yeah, here should be the value of 10 and here should be the value of 17.
You said the good ones. So you have the good ones and the bad ones. That means you have pitfalls that some automation testers might not be aware. Maybe you can tell us more about that because it sounds really interesting.
Yeah, this is actually something that I know from years ago when I was attending your courses. Anything you want to be in this domain, in this IT domain, you can be a good one or a bad one. So even as a developer, let's say you can be not necessarily a bad developer, but a less than interesting developer.
The average and the upskilled.
Okay. Let's say the average developer only looks at whatever he needs to do for his simple task. Like he has 3 rows describing his task, and that's all. That's all he's gonna focus on. Similarly, you can go and look for a tester. A tester can have a simple test that is just opening up a web page and looking at 3 values and making sure that those are the correct ones. However, a good QA automation understands why those values are there. Where are they coming from? If they are not correct, he or she is struggling to see exactly why the values are not correct. I mean, the defects that you are reporting needs to be as accurately documented as possible. You're not just saying, yeah, so I've logged in on the web page and I've noticed these 3 values are not correct. That's not enough.
So basically, what you are telling me is that they need to know also part of the business. So they have to understand what the users, how the users think, what the users expect, so that they can think about the test cases and different scenarios that they are testing. Is not just receiving a requirement, figuring out you have 3 values, they need to be equal with something, you just implement that and that's it. So the help of rising the quality of a software is by contributing through also business knowledge and technical knowledge. By the way, is technical knowledge important? How much important is it?
Well, I'm not gonna lie, it is important, but maybe not as much as for a good developer, like above the average developer. So if you just want to test an application, you can join a project without previous knowledge regarding how everything works in that domain. Let's go back to banking. You know, if you want to join as a tester in a banking project, you can join with 0 to maybe some knowledge regarding how banking operates, and you can learn as you go there. As a developer, you already need to know exactly what the transaction is, how the bank operates, what system it is using, what you need to know regarding bank security, and so on. But as a tester, you can learn along the way. And this is exactly why there are lots of people that are preferring to enter this big domain of IT from a tester point of view. And then in time, join the developer side. Don't get me wrong, this is not just one step to become a developer. Like for example, for myself, I fell in love with testing and with quality assurance, especially because of what you said. I have the opportunity to see exactly how a product evolves, how it addresses a client's needs, and exactly when or how it's going to be used in production. And This is for me, but I've also known a lot of people that started from scratch with zero knowledge. They became testers, then automation testers, and then they made the step to automation. Sorry, to development, and that's a perfectly fine career direction, from my opinion.
But you can as well just stay there and get upskilled in
Exactly.
automation testing yourself, because you don't necessarily want to be a developer or an architect. I mean, there are parallel paths in your career, so
Exactly.
you don't necessarily have to see them like I always say, like the next level of the Pokemon or something like that. So it's yeah, you can just decide what you like. If you like to go further, change your path into development, you do that. Because I know that you're a very skilled Java developer and Python developer, if I'm not wrong. So and you chose to stay on this path, at least for the moment, it seems.
Yeah, that's right. There's one more thing that I should mention here. Starting as a tester doesn't, if you want to, go another way, there isn't just one possibility. So from a testing engineer, you can become even a business analyst or a project manager or a DevOps engineer, especially because you understand the business, you understand all of the products and all of the utilities that are involved in developing a project. And if you see, well, I like this a little bit more, then after testing, you can go in that direction in special, yeah.
So I see we have a question, and it's anyway one of the topics that I wanted to get into and ask you about. Is can you please tell us about your favorite tools and frameworks for a QA, such as Selenium, Cypress, and so on? I would start. Let's answer the question, but I would start with, first of all, tell us whether you would go for Python or Java in this direction, especially considering you would be a beginner wanting to start in automation testing. What would be your first choice? And then let's discuss a bit more also about frameworks, usual frameworks, and how hard they used.
All right, so that's a very good question. And this is something that I've been thinking about a lot in the past couple of years. Even though I love Python and I love its simple syntax, I must say that for anybody that wants to start learning programming, even for automation in testing or for development, I recommend Java for a beginner. Why? Because Python is very simple. And if you start with something simple, and then along the way, you find yourself in a situation where you need to learn to work with Java or with JavaScript or C++, after learning Python, anything else will be like very, very difficult. However, if you start from Java, which is a, let's say, more, not complex necessarily, but a more complete language, and then you make the switch to Python, of course, it's gonna seem easier, and you're gonna see lots of differences, but that's gonna be in your advantage. So you're not gonna waste so much time adapting to that language, because you're already gonna know the basics of everything that you need to know, and migrating should be easier. So in my opinion, you should go Java first, then Python, or Java first, then C++.
That's a very interesting point of view. So I know that a lot of developers say Java is verbose. So if you start with Python, it will be easier. On the other hand, we can also say that if you start with Java and then later on you'd like to try something else, like go on a development path, it will be easier to find, at least in my perspective, positions with Java or JavaScript rather than Python. Maybe it's my wrong overview, but I saw on the market lately more positions for Java and JavaScript developers rather than Python. So you will anyway end up learning both. But if you start with, if you start with the more difficult one, then of course it will be a piece of cake to learn the other. So that's what it
exactly. Yeah. And you're right regarding the market. There are certain periods when Java seems to be more popular in regards to people looking for juniors. There are other times when honestly I've seen more people interested in Python. I'm not sure exactly who.
Python is also very, very known on the machine learning and artificial intelligence market, on the, let's say, more mathematical market, while Java is more known as a language for implementing powerful backend solutions in general. So that's where it also may come from. But of course, machine learning and artificial intelligence, they are very they are on a very high ascending curve now. So we can't say that in the future both of them will probably be equal in terms of opportunities on the market. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. So
no, this is exactly where I wanted to go. So if you start from Java and you learn the basic of programming in general, so you start and you go from, basic structures, object-oriented classes, advanced data types. After you master all of this, if you find yourself in a situation where you need to work with Python or with JavaScript, it's gonna look like a piece of cake, because Python has more flexible syntax, JavaScript in the same area, so it's not going to be a problem. If you go to C++, for example, Java and C++ from a syntax point of view are, let's say, not very different. So it's not going to be so difficult to migrate from one to the other. And yeah, if you are interested in machine learning, then yeah, maybe you want to start with Python, but that's a whole different discussion. I mean, that's a whole different domain. And you're right, we don't know exactly where this domain is going to be in a couple of years, but we know it's going to be pretty high.
Yeah, and about frameworks. So what are the frameworks you'd recommend someone to start with in terms of automation testing?
So the first and the most important framework should be Selenium right now, because it can be used for multiple programming languages. I mean, look at me. 3 months ago I was writing automation tests with Selenium and Python. 2 months ago, I was writing tests with JavaScript and Selenium, and right now I'm writing with Java and Selenium. Selenium is the common denominator here because it's compatible with all these languages. However, if you're going to JavaScript right now, you might also be interested in learning a little bit about Cypress. This is like a framework which was developed as an alternative to Selenium, and it's natively written in JavaScript, so it has a lot of functionalities which can be easily let's say adopted for any type of project, and in my opinion, yeah, you should look into Cypress if you plan on working with JavaScript. And of course, you need to learn a little bit about writing REST API test cases. There are applications that can help you to write API test cases such as Postman, and this is a pretty standard tool even for developers to test their own endpoints. But from my perspective, you should learn at least one library specific to each language when it comes to API test cases. Like, for example, in Python, you have the requests module, and that is very simple to understand, very easy to use. And Java, starting with Java 17, if I'm not mistaken, has a new HTTP client that can be used for writing such test cases. And here, Laura, I'm waiting for you to contradict me if I'm mistaking the Java version.
I think you're right. I'm not sure if it's 17. I think it was a bit earlier, but indeed 17 is the latest long-term supported. So I'm always saying 17. People ask me sometimes when was the var word introduced in Java. I know it was Java 10, but I usually say 11 because 11 is the latest long-term supported, and we usually in production use the latest long-term supported. So I know about the client. Why I'm surprised is that I didn't know anyone is using it. So it really surprises me that it's used in automation testing, since in development we are still usually relying on the frameworks we are using. So if you use Spring, for example, you have web client, you have OpenFane. Some developers still use the old REST template. So I wasn't really usually a lot directly features from the JDK in this site. That's why I was surprised. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm the type of guy that's usually looking into new technologies rather than old ones that are being deprecated. So yeah, if something new is being released right now and it's useful for me, I'm willing to upgrade my project and start working on that. You are right. In old projects, you may still find some old frameworks and old versions of libraries used for API testing, but I'm not saying that everybody's migrating so fast. As you know, if something is working, something is in place, don't change it.
Don't change it. Yeah. Okay, cool. So we already have a second question. So Horia, someone is interested, at least one of our viewers is interested. Why have you chose to become an automation engineer over a developer? Because most of people aspire to become developers who are in automation space. So we can split a bit this question. And first of all, are we sure that most of the automation engineers really aspire to be developers? I would say that maybe some of them aspire to change at some point, and we can debate on that. I think, as you said earlier, it's not necessarily to be developers. Some of them aspire in the infrastructure, others aspire to become business analysts, others maybe want to become delivery managers. Because it's not necessarily to go to the development field. I'm not sure if most of them, it's necessarily most of them or not. I have no idea. Maybe you can clarify if it's most of them. I'm also curious, that's not part of the question, but it's my curiosity, are there developers that change to automation testing? Maybe we can debate this topic as well. So let's take these points and see.
Okay, so let's first take the part where most QA want to be developer. That's not right. I mean, in my experience, I would say about 15-20% maybe of the people that I have been working with aspire to become developers. I also had students in my classes that started and were convinced along the way that it's easier to join this domain by becoming a tester and then going on a different path. Doesn't matter if it was a developer or as you said, business analyst, product owner, delivery manager, and so on. So yeah, most is harshly said. So let's say about 15%, and I think I'm happy with that. I also know some stories regarding what you asked. I also know some stories about developers that chose to become testers because they had the bad luck of joining projects which were obsolete and all they had to do was documentation and bug fixing, and they felt like they weren't writing enough code. They felt like they were not developing themselves enough, and they were looking at the testers, and the testers were always writing code. Especially in an end-of-life project, you have the opportunity to try out a lot of technologies for testing. If the project is no longer developing as a whole, you still need to write a lot of automation test cases which will be kept with the project, but you have a lot more flexibility and you don't have new features coming in. So that's also a very nice part. And regarding the first part of the first question, why I chose to stay as a tester, well, initially I wasn't sure I was gonna be doing this for this part of my career. I joined as a tester because I was coming straight out of college and I had two passions: networking and programming. And this position, my previous position, the one that I have been working on, was the only one on the market which combined these two for a junior. After working with developers that were also interested in networking and programming, I realized that I knew more regarding the product. I knew more about the networking side, and this is why I chose to stay here. I'm not saying that all the developers are like this. As you said, there are some average developers and some good developers. Don't get me wrong, I had the opportunity to work with some architects that can school me in both networking and programming and whatever else. But this was the main reason. I had two passions, and testing was able to combine both of them in a single project. Right now, I'm combining my programming passion with the desire to learn something new in banking. And this is also something quite nice that you get to do as a tester. Switch your domains between networking, banking, automotive, and all the others, like going to medicine projects. You have the opportunity to work in all of them if you have a very good basis of how testing works and how testing should be done in general. So yeah, hopefully I covered all of the questions.
I also have a perspective on that can fill some gaps in this discussion. First of all, as a team lead, I always found easier to manage the time for the automation testers rather than for developers or some other members of the team, because let's say if all my automation testing team at some point was asking for vacation at the same time, say I had 3 or 4 automation testers and they all said, August 2nd week, I'm off. I'm going on an island, and I don't want to connect to my computer. It was a lot easier for me to just have 1 week without all my automation testers than convince somehow my client that I need to have 1 week without all my developers. So it's that's one perspective. It's somehow I feel that a little bit less stressful in this domain rather than development or infrastructure or some other. Maybe I'm wrong, but from out as an outsider, it looks to me like you are still a developer, you are still building code, you are still building an application. It's just the purpose that's different, but otherwise the purpose being you are testing another application, but you are still writing Java code, you are using the latest technologies sometimes, which sometimes doesn't happen in the app, as you said. It's still complicated because you need to learn the business of your app and sometimes even know it better than the developers, although I can argue here myself because I always think that as a developer, you should also learn very well the business. You still have to take into consideration the maintainability, clean coding, solid principles, stuff like that, because you are writing an application, and if you mess it up, then it will be very difficult to add new capabilities for testing some other stuff. But at the same time, it is less stressful because if at some point you didn't deliver something, I think it's easier to convince the client that you didn't deliver the test rather than didn't deliver the capability, you know. This is how I see some things. So that can be an advantage from my perspective for an automation tester. I'm not sure, did you feel the same?
No, you're right. I mean, in certain moments, if you're not a manager and you don't have to answer for the quality percentage of a project, it can be less stressful. But once you become a team leader or a manager and somebody's asking you how much of the tests are completed and what's your how confident are you in the quality of the product? If you don't have enough tests written and if you don't have enough coverage, it can become a little bit stressful. But yeah, if you're talking about juniors and middle engineers, then yeah, it's possible it's going to be less stressful as a QA engineer rather than a developer.
That's just again one point, because it's about always in the end how your client is, what they look at. If they impose KPIs such as the coverage be 90%, and then depending on who's managing that, it can become stressful like for any other development. But in the end, you are still a developer. So if you put in a balance development and automation testing, in the end, they are both like developers. The only thing it differs is what they actually build, the capability itself, that is a simple banking transaction, or how did you describe it at the beginning of our conversation, or it's testing that the simple banking transaction really works properly and you have no like transactionability, security issues, performance issues, and so on. And by the way, discussing security, performance, transactionability, these non-functional requirements are always part of what you test as well, or how does that work? How is, like, say, pen testing distributed in an application? Who is dealing with that? It's somebody else? It's part of your team?
Well, I'm going to answer this firstly with a story. I worked on a project where nobody mentioned pen testing and performance testing. And when we delivered the results of standard testing and standard automation, the project manager was like, and the pen testing and security testing and the performance. So yeah, these components of non-functional testing should always be considered, even if they're not in specification, even though nobody asks for them. Even if it's a product that is working only in internal network and it has very low chances of being attacked from outside the network, it should still be taken into consideration to execute these types of test cases. So yeah, I've been working with networking products for about 5 years. Right now I'm working in banking, but I can tell you for sure that no matter where you're working, no matter what type of project you're in, you should take into consideration this type of performance at least, and make sure that the product is able to scale up depending on the number of users that are trying to access the application or to use the product in a certain moment. Security testing, obviously, you need to make sure that there are no vulnerabilities in your, well, code, in the code of the developers. Firstly, in the technologies, you need to make sure that there are no vulnerabilities there. And there are, yeah, lots of other, let's say, corner cases that can be attacked in testing, depending on the exact area where the product is working. Like, for example, if you are working on, let's say, testing smartwatches, there are certain situations where you need to make sure that performance is not taken into consideration only from, a movement type. So if you're testing a Fitbit or a Google Watch or something like that, you don't need just to cover the fact that the watch is increasing your number of steps based on the movement of your hand. You also need to take into consideration in what other situations you are moving your hand. Is it counting correctly? If you're doing a performance testing for this type of movement, how many movements per second can you take into consideration? What type of training exercises can you do and mistake them for steps? So yeah, there are lots and lots of directions in which the testing can go on. Of course, right now, I can give only a few examples, but as you go deeper in a project and your imagination starts running wide, you can see even more corner cases and more situations where you can encounter new test cases.
There are always so many use cases. Do you think that products usually, or product owners usually allocate enough time for testing, or there are always difficulties in this area?
No, because in my experience, product owners are most usually just asking the question, are you confident in the testing you've done so far? And, based on the testing that I've done so far, yeah, maybe I can be confident, but maybe I've only covered 30% of all the test cases. So yeah, 30% of what I did so far is good, but what about the rest of the 70%? You need to handle the discussions with a product manager or product owner with very, very big care. Like, you don't want to seem too arrogant and be like, yeah, everything is all right, the product is running smoothly, but you also don't want to be so desperate as to say each day, I still need 2 more weeks, right now, I still need 10 more days to test everything. I'm not sure, I'm not confident. You need to find a balance, because otherwise, no matter how much time the project would have, you wouldn't be taken seriously anymore. So you don't need to be very relaxed, but you don't need to be very eager to execute everything as well. The balance is key.
Yeah, there is a trend I'm interested in. So I see that many companies today start to have this approach where they want the developer to do everything from zero to including the automation tests themselves. And there are big companies here that work on this approach. It's Google, it's Adobe, there are many others. So they have a developers team, and the developer is responsible from everything from the database to the automation test. And the main reason I've heard for why they choose this approach is that this way they build the ownership of the developer over a specific capability they build. So they are responsible from zero to the end on the entire capability, because they say, well, when we didn't do that, when we had separate automation testing teams and development teams, the developer would say, well, that's not my responsibility. The automation tester would say, yeah, that's not my responsibility. And then they had problems on who's actually responsible over something. So this way, theoretically, you have only one person from scratch to everything, so you can't have such problems. But do you think is this a good approach, or maybe this is a good approach only sometimes? What is your perspective on this subject?
Well, in my perspective, it's not a very efficient approach. I mean, in theory, yeah, it sounds good to have one person responsible for functionality from the initial phases all the way to delivery. But this is applicable when you're talking about, I don't know, small functionalities, not banking transactions. I know that was a bad example for a simple functionality. But in testing, most of the times I found that having multiple persons looking at the same thing coming up with different perspectives. So if, for example, I have written 20 test cases for functionality, and I'm sure that I have covered everything, if I give the same functionality to you and I'm giving you my 20 test cases, I'm more than sure that you're going to be able to come up with 5 more. And this will happen if we go to one more person and one more person and one more person until we have covered everything. Of course, if you're talking only about seniors, we may be able to cover everything with just 2 engineers. But having just one person looking at the same thing from starting point to end may leave a lot of situations, may leave some test cases slip through the cracks, and automatically bugs would pop along the way. Because once you started writing on something, you will not see your mistakes so easy. I mean, you're going to be confident what you did is good. Imagine painting a wall, right? So you're painting a wall, you're changing the color from, I don't know, white to blue. If you're just doing that yourself, in the first run, you may say everything is perfect, but then your girlfriend or your wife can come along and say you've missed a spot there and a spot there.
Don't put the girlfriend or the wife here, because they will always find something. So just
exactly
somebody else.
Exactly, and this is why it's nice to have another pair of eyes, to have one more person to look over what you have worked on and see even tiny mistakes. Some tiny mistakes may be, I don't know, forgettable, maybe a small defect, a minor one, a low impact one. However, there are certain situations where even a small crack can lead to a big defect and to a high impact problem.
So one of the things, by the way, that one of my perspectives over the automation testers, because I really appreciate very much this area, and I will tell you exactly why, and it's related to our discussion. That's why I want to point this out, is the skills. So the skills are really important, when both the skills you have when you are employed, as well as the skills you build throughout the experience as an automation tester. And one of them, for example, is paying attention to details. So I'm not talking technical skills. Paying attention to details is one of the most important skills that you, first of all, should have when you earn a job as an automation tester. Secondly, when that you build throughout your experience. And that's something that you don't necessarily build as a developer. That's something that I've seen, something that I observed throughout many years of experience. And how did I observe it very well is because, again, we have situations where automation testers change their career path and join a development team, because they can do that. Again, so it's just changing where you use the language. But what you observe when something like that happens is that usually, maybe it's not always on 100%, but usually people who started as testers happen to be more attentive to details in development. And I observed that so many times as a team lead and as a technical lead, that I would say it's clear you build those skills. If you are even a couple of years an automation tester, without even noticing, you build skills of paying attention to details that you don't build while you are a simple developer. So that's a very, very good advantage for those who want to join from an automation testing to the development, to change their career path, is the paying attention to details. But on the other hand, is because it was related to discussion having zero to hero versus having 2 different teams. Again, it makes sense from my perspective to have 2 different teams, because even if from a manager point of view, for me, it would be, of course, much easier to say, I don't need to manage 2 teams. I don't need to have 2 different groups with 2 different responsibilities, and I only have 1 group. Fine, for a manager, it's clearly awesome. On the other hand, in terms of the product's quality, having a different pair of eyes, what you said, and not only having a different pair of eyes, but having a different pair of eyes trained in skills that are related to finding use cases, paying attention, looking at details from different angles. It's something that helps in increasing the quality of the product in the end. Thing that is very difficult to prove, because it's how do you measure that in the end? It's
exactly, yeah.
You can measure it in different ways. I mean, there are ways like how many bugs, stuff like that. But what happens usually in a project, if you want to prove someone, you have one product. And how do you prove that it would be better the first approach than the other? Because you still have one product, so you can't compare how many bugs you would have had if you did the other way. I can't have different like temporal times now, like in Back to the Future, and have on one the first approach, on the other one the second, and say this is the best one. So and if you compare to different products, still doesn't work, because you can compare to different products, they can have different ways of being built, so the approaches might be different as well.
Yeah. And if I may interrupt you for 1 second here, you are right in one perspective. So the ideal team, let's say in my perspective, would be somehow composed by developers that were in the past engineers in testing, like QA engineers, but they would also still be open to do peer review of whatever they have developed. So it's not just about peer programming, writing together codes to make sure that you have the best approach, but to also, if you are reviewing if you are reviewing each other's code, if you're reviewing each other's defects, and you are writing test cases one for the other, it might be a little bit more efficient. So yeah, that might be a middle way between the two approaches that you talked about, having two separate teams and one team that is just for everything. Maybe having one team that has experience as a quality engineers, and at the same time open to reviewing each other's code, reviewing each other's functionalities, opening defects one from the other. The workload, however, depending on the project, may be a little bit too much. So if you're talking about a big application, again, if you're going to a banking application, it may be just too much for just wanting to handle everything. And sorry for interrupting you, but you open up a very good point of view. The fact that developers that were in the past automation engineers and testers may be more open to writing good code and think about more situations directly from the starters, and not needing necessarily a dedicated tester.
Yeah, exactly. We have a couple more questions. Let's take them. So from Amalia, how hard it is for a manual tester to transition to automation? Is it common for people with no technical faculty but with experience in manual testing to become automation testers?
So first of all, let's take them step by step. From manual to automation is all about what you want. I mean, do you really want to do that? How much time are you willing to allocate in order to make that switch? I've started as a manual tester. I mean, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, yeah, I started as a manual tester, and I've just had to prove myself over and over again that my programming knowledge was enough to make the switch to automation testing. It wasn't like anybody came up to me directly and said, do you want to do that? No, I had to prove myself. Of course, you may work with people that might be a little bit more willing to give you that chance, but I had to prove myself. And after proving that, I just went only this way, let's say. And the second part of the question was?
It is common for people with no technical faculty, but with experience in manual testing to become automation testers.
I wouldn't say common. I mean, not everybody that doesn't have technical background can reach an automation position, but I'm willing to say that those that I have been working with and were very ambitious were able to make this career change in 1-2 years of intensive work. So it's not going to happen overnight. That I can tell you for sure. Just because you're joining this domain and you are willing to show up for work and execute the test cases, write the test cases, do test plan review, it's not going to be enough. You still need to go the extra mile. Yeah, I'm going to be honest. It's a little bit disadvantageous to not have a technical background, but you can compensate for that with some additional work.
This pretty much links to one of the previous videos I still have recorded on this channel, where I discussed actually about this, about becoming a developer without having technical knowledge. And I had two very special guests who managed to like become senior developers. I mean, again, developers, automation testers, it's the same thing from my perspective because you are still building code. In that video, I was discussing development, but in my perspective, if they said and they proved, and I can recommend you watch that video, if they proved that you can become a developer, starting from having no technical background, I guess that you can become an automation tester. And what, if I remember correctly, what were they saying at that time is, yes, you can do that. It's not impossible, but you have to invest time and work because you have to learn languages, frameworks. So you want to start, Horia was saying a bit earlier, start with Java, and then learn Selenium is very important. And we are waiting to tell him to tell us even more how to proceed after Selenium. But yeah, it's in the end about investing time to learn the language. And how can a fresher get a good command in Java stack? So for a fresher like me, it is especially the Spring framework. It is mess to get started. Some prefer you directly jump to Spring Boot. I'm not sure how much related is this question to our discussion, but I could say that.
If it comes to Spring, you may be the one to answer.
Yeah, I think this is a different topic. How to start with? Let's take it in private, my friend. And let's guys, you can contact us on Twitter or LinkedIn, and we can discuss there if you have questions. We will continue focus on the today's topic, which is related to automation tests in general. So, Horia, what do you want to tell us more about? I'm a junior. I learned Java because you told me to learn Java because I want to become an automation tester. And then I at least started learning Selenium. Should I learn something in parallel with that? What should I do after that? When I'm ready to join a team, what is the minimum knowledge I need to join a team?
From my perspective, Java and one framework such as Selenium should be enough for starters. Once you start working in a project, there is one. I'm not saying if I could call it framework or additional language itself. Anyway, it's called BDD, behavior driven development, and it's a manner of testing in which the test cases are written in a natural language. Firstly, you need to develop the methods that are actually executing some validations or executing certain steps, certain interactions with the application. And then for those pieces of code that you have written in Python or in Java, you are writing some natural language expressions that are executing or are calling that piece of code.
Is that Cucumber what you are telling us?
Cucumber, yeah.
I'm talking about Cucumber. Oh, okay. I think it's not the only one, but that's what I remember. I have encountered. Okay, because I know it's that question for Java developers. What is the mostly used vegetable? Is the bean or the cucumber? It depends on the perspective. If you're a automation tester, it's probably the cucumber. So, yeah, tell us more about. How
yeah, so yeah, it's quite important because even though personally I don't like it very much, I've noticed that it's becoming more and more popular. The reason is if you have the correct code written from a testing perspective, it's very easy to write test cases. So a test case would be something like, given the user has an account, when the user logs in, then he can view his, amount of money in his account. And this will be a test case written and executed directly from a framework that is developed by one automation team. But again, the important part, what you need to understand is that underneath it, so under the hood, is still Java code and it's still written in a programming in a manner that needs to be easy to understand and easy to follow. Another framework that I may recommend, and it's quite similar to Selenium, is the Appium. Appium is a framework used for mobile testing, especially. the big rocks are still similar to Selenium, and this is why Selenium is so popular, because being open source, it has opened the way for other frameworks as well. So APM may be also a good choice. Robot framework is also very in demand in the market. Personally, I haven't worked with robot framework, but I know from job postings and from other projects that I know that it's quite important for everybody. I haven't worked with it because, let's be honest, we cannot work with everything there is. And there's one more framework that I found recently as being of interest to automation testers. Is called Serenity. And Serenity is somehow another layer over Selenium. It just makes the code easier to write. It has a lot of qualities that improve the reporting part. It makes your life easier to develop the test cases, so you don't need to focus so much on the logic. You just need to focus on the test cases themselves. So it's a Selenium, but on a higher level. But again, this is why I'm saying start with Java and start with Selenium. Don't jump directly to easy stuff. Because if you start with, let's say, Python and something like Serenity, which again is over Selenium, and then you're gonna go to a deeper level, it's gonna look harder. If you start from a good basis and then move on to simpler stuff, you have a lot of flexibility and you can go from one point to the other.
I think that actually answers the question about Spring and Spring Boot, isn't it? Because it's the same thing. So
yeah,
start with Spring or Spring Boot. Most developers will tell you start with Spring and then Spring Boot, because you learn what's behind the scenes. If you start with Spring Boot, same as Serenity versus Selenium, you will not know. Sometimes you just add something in your application properties, it starts working, you have no idea why. If something happens, you don't know how to solve it. So usually that's the way in general to go, like start with what's behind the scenes and then go to the abstraction layer. Don't start with the abstraction layer, because it's too abstract and you will not learn exactly what happens.
Exactly.
It's too transparent, you don't see. That's a very good one. So should an automation tester focus also on design patterns or stuff related to how to write the code?
A good one, yes. Again, here comes the difference between the average automation tester and the good one. I have colleagues that have years of experience and haven't used a design pattern knowingly in production. And they have a very good career, they have a very good salary, they have plenty of experience in their domain, and they are continuously looked after for different jobs. However, a good developer for the automation frameworks needs to know some design patterns if he needs to start a project from scratch. If you join a project that has been running for 2 years, obviously the automation part may be already in place, the structure may be already developed, and you're just there to write test cases, make improvements, and come up with more efficient solutions. But if you start from scratch, if you have the opportunity to join somewhere from scratch, you need to know some design patterns, not only for development, but for testing as well. There is one big design pattern that you need to know from a testing perspective. It's called page object model. It's basically dividing the components of, again, for UI testing, so for Selenium, identifying the elements in a web page that you want to work with, performing different interactions with those elements, and the tests themselves. So it's pretty similar to how some design patterns may be used inside developer perspective, but it's just adapted to the testing side.
It can be considered just a normal structural design pattern like MVCs, for example. But
exactly what I wanted you to say, because it was escaping my mind right now. The MVC, yeah, thank you. Mm-hmm. So it has 3 components that are combined and they are doing their job together, same way that the MVC does.
Okay, cool. I had in my mind, I think that could be a last question because we are already almost out of the time. So guys, if you still have questions, now is the moment because we are going to end soon. But I wanted to also ask, because we focused a lot on the advantages of being an automation tester over developer infrastructure and something else. Let's end it with which would be the disadvantages of being an automation tester. to have a complete full picture about the role.
I'm glad that you asked this because I don't want to lie to people and say that, yeah, join the automation testing side. It's only, cookies and juice. No, so you're right. There are certain disadvantages. First of all, you may risk getting stuck in a rut. I mean, getting stuck in a rut where you are just running the automation test cases, so you're no longer developing, you are debugging the existing test cases, and that's just about it. So that's not necessarily a problem for your day-to-day life, but for your career. Because if you're just doing that for 6 months, for 1 year, then you're no longer gaining experience. You're just repeating each day, you are stuck in a rut and you're going nowhere. And you may find yourself after 1 year in a situation where you want to go to an interview and being asked something technical, and you're like, well, I don't know, because I have only been running tests and not writing test cases. And again, one more disadvantage may be when you're working with a project or with technologies that are very inflexible, and you don't have the possibility to switch it up, to try working with something new or something new. Yeah. And that's also one problem that I've seen automation developers being stuck with. But these are, in my opinion, the most problematic ones. Also, and that's it. Sorry, I said that these are the two ones. Always make sure that you don't fall on running too much manual testing. So you may land a job that's called QA automation testing. And when you get there, you may see that you have more than 50% manual testing. Make sure that you don't stay with a job that's mostly manual testing, even though it should be automation testing. It's okay to have like a 50, okay, not 50-50, but maybe 70-30, 70 automation, 30 manual testing, or 80-20. But if you go to the other side and you have 80% manual testing with 20% running automation and 0 writing code for the automation, run like hell, because you're not going to be able to develop yourself. And this is me being honest. So I'm sorry if there are people working.
I've even heard about situations where people were employed as testers and then they were given support tasks. So it's can be worse.
Yeah, no, that's not cool. So yeah, make sure that you are going to a project that is allowing you to develop yourself. Otherwise, you will just regret it, and you'll just blame the position of QA automation and write on I don't know, LinkedIn or something. Being a QA automation developer doesn't mean much, but it does. You just need to find the right context. That's my opinion.
Okay, so long story short, to summarize everything that we discussed, or at least the points that stick in my mind. You can be a very good automation tester, and you may or may not change your career path. It's not mandatory. You can have this or that depending on what you like. Automation testers have different skills than developers, and sometimes that even helps them when they join a development team, like for example being attentive to details. If I'm now starting from zero, I would start with Java. But I also have the Python option, but Java is a bit more difficult, more verbose, and starting with the difficult piece will make me easier learn Python later. That's one thing I learned. Then I would continue with Selenium, and only after I know what's behind the scenes, I'm going to Serenity, and I'm learning Cucumber and other tools that helps. Is it something that I missed?
No, so far so good. But one more thing that I know that you're always saying, whatever you are, so whether you are a developer or automation testing, make sure that you're a good one. Make sure that you are giving that extra mile, and you're not just the average one that is just stuck at a 9-to-5 job. Make sure that whatever you do it good.
Thank you very much, Horia. So I see we have some discussions. I read your messages, guys, but I didn't see a question. So we don't have questions anymore. It's already almost 1 hour since we started. So I think it's time to wrap up. Thank you very much for being here with me and discussing all this interesting stuff. And I hope you guys who watched us you will benefit a lot from our discussion and at least give you some direction. If you still have questions, don't forget that you can always leave the questions in the comment section of the video, or you can find us on LinkedIn and Twitter, and we will make our best to answer to all your concerns. Until next time we meet, I will say thank you. I'm waving goodbye and have a great time for learning further. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.